At 03:47 hours on November 23, 1942, Radioman Third Class Thomas McKenzie heard it. Not an alarm, not the klaxon that meant collision or fire or incoming attack. Something worse, a sound that made his stomach drop cold into his boots, a sharp, distinctive click-hiss-pop coming through his headphones. Electromagnetic static, the kind that only happened when a radio transmitter powered down during a crash dive. The kind that German listening stations had been trained for 18 months to recognize. The kind that meant death was triangulating their position right now. McKenzie ripped off his headphones. His hands shook. Sweat had already plastered his shirt to his ribs, and the room felt like it was closing in. The radio compartment was coffin narrow, just enough space for the main transmitter, the receiver stack, and a bunk wedged between humming metal cabinets. The thermometer read 87 degrees Fahrenheit. It was 3:47 in the morning. The air hung dead and tropical. The USS Grayback was descending through 200 feet of water. Somewhere above them in the darkness, a German U-boat was listening, waiting, ready to calculate the exact coordinates of an American submarine that had just announced its presence like ringing a dinner bell in a dark room. McKenzie's age was 21. His experience was 4 months. His authority to do anything about this was 0. The fear was immediate and total, not abstract fear, physical fear, the kind that made his heart hammer so hard he thought it might break his ribs. His mouth had gone dry. Every nerve in his body was suddenly aware that 47 men were in this steel tube, sealed 200 feet underwater, and somewhere a German captain was getting bearings on their position. The Grayback began to level off. Silence from the captain's wheelhouse. Professional silence. The kind that meant someone was making decisions that would either keep everyone alive or send them all to the bottom. McKenzie sat rigidly on his bunk, hands clasped so tight his fingernails cut crescents into his palms. He waited. The seconds stretched. The hum of electrical equipment suddenly seemed apocalyptic. Every circuit, every relay, the entire boat seemed to be screaming its location to the enemy. 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10. No explosion, no impact of a torpedo, just the mechanical sounds of a submarine trying to be invisible in water that had stopped being safe. By dawn, the Grayback had moved 50 kilometers south, changed depth twice, and reversed course 3 times. The Germans didn't find them this time, but everyone aboard knew it was luck, not skill, and luck, by definition, runs out. The statistics were sitting in files at Navy headquarters in Washington. 8 submarines lost. Between September and October 1942, USS Amberjack, USS Grampus, USS Argonaut, USS S-39, USS S-27, 3 more names redacted from the official casualty lists. 8 boats, 356 men, all of them dead for the same reason. Every American submarine made the same sound when it powered down its transmitter to dive. The Germans had learned to recognize it. They were killing American submarines like fishermen clearing a pond. The Navy knew about the problem. It had known since June 1942. 4 months of knowledge. Reports had been filed by commanding officers describing how German submarines seemed to appear exactly where American boats were conducting operations. The engineers at Bureau of Ships had run the numbers. The physicists had confirmed it. The commanding admirals had acknowledged it. And nothing had been done. Because the fix would take time. New transmitter modifications, shielded condensers, different frequency protocols. The Navy had prototyped systems, but installing those systems on every submarine in the fleet would take 14 months, minimum, possibly 18. The bureaucracy moved at the speed of committee meetings and procurement forms. The Germans did not. Meanwhile, American submarines kept diving and dying. It was midday when the captain called an all-hands meeting. Robert Benson was a small man, 5'8", compact, built like a jockey, but there was something in his eyes that made him seem bigger. He'd been commanding submarines since before Pearl Harbor. He'd seen what war did to men who didn't understand exactly what they were walking into. He'd called everyone to the torpedo room, 47 men packed into the tight compartment, between stacks of 21-inch missiles and equipment racks. The only light came from red battle lamps, the kind that wouldn't blind you if you had to evacuate into darkness. Benson stood on an ammunition locker so his voice could carry. He didn't raise it. He didn't need to. "We have a problem," he said. "Every time we transmit a message and then dive, the Germans can hear us. Not see us, hear us. There's an electromagnetic pulse when the transmitter powers down. The Germans have trained their operators to recognize that sound. They're getting good at it." He paused, looked at the men's faces, young faces. Most of them had never been to sea before the war. "The Navy is working on a fix, but the fix won't be ready for at least a year. We have 8 months of patrol duty scheduled on this vessel. 8 months in waters where the Germans are actively hunting American submarines by listening for that sound." Someone coughed. Nobody moved. "I wanted you to understand what we're facing," Benson continued. "Why we're silent when we should be silent. Why we evade when we should evade. Because the odds of us going home at the end of 8 months are not good. Not because we're not good at what we do, because physics is working against us, and I don't fight physics." He stepped down from the locker. The meeting was over. The men filed out slowly without talking. That night, McKenzie couldn't sleep. He lay on his bunk, staring at the cables and junction boxes 3 inches from his face. The radio equipment hummed around him, the constant electrical heartbeat of a submarine at sea. He kept replaying the moment that morning when he'd heard the sound. The click-hiss-pop. The moment when 47 men's lives had compressed into a single second of probability. Somewhere out there, 356 American sailors were on the ocean floor. USS Amberjack, USS Grampus, all the others. They were down there because of that sound, that one distinctive electromagnetic signature that their transmitters made, that one sound that the Germans had learned to recognize. There had to be a way to hide that sound. There had to be. McKenzie stared into the darkness. Around him, the transmitter equipment hummed, unaware that it was a killer, unaware that every time it powered down, it was signing a death warrant. But McKenzie was starting to think about how to change that, how to make the transmitter silent, how to hide the signature that was killing his crew. He had no authority to do so, no training, no authorization from Navy engineers or commanding officers or anyone in the chain of command. He also had a bunk 3 feet from the transmitter, and he had 7 hours until dawn. And he had an idea. At 01:32 hours on November 24, 1942, Thomas McKenzie was still awake. The Grayback had surfaced at midnight to charge batteries. McKenzie had volunteered for the night watch in the radio compartment. The real reason wasn't the frequency checks. The real reason was that the sound from this morning, the click-hiss-pop that meant death, kept echoing in his head. Sleep felt like surrender. He sat on his bunk with a piece of salvage in his hands, a condenser from the spare receiver unit, old, condemned for scrap, nobody would miss it. The electromagnetic pulse from the transmitter, the killer signature, that was the problem, that one sound. And 356 men died. But what if you could make that sound spread out? Make it gradual instead of sharp. Make it sound like background static instead of a radio pulse. McKenzie worked carefully. The older receiver had a military-grade condenser, large, robust. He removed it with a soldering iron, bending the connections carefully. By 02:30, the modification was complete. He'd wired the condenser into the transmitter's power-down sequence. 2 copper connections, perfect joints, silver solder that gleamed under the red battle lamp. He reached forward and powered down the transmitter. The modification worked. The characteristic sound was gone. Instead, there was soft, continuous hiss, background noise, the kind of electromagnetic artifact that ocean water created naturally, the kind that German operators had learned to ignore. McKenzie fired up the transmitter, powered it down, powered it up, powered it down again. Each time, the same result. He had done it. There was a knock on the bulkhead. Standing in the doorway was Lieutenant Charles Weston, the engineering officer, 43 years old. Weston's eyes moved from Mackenzie's face to the condenser to the modified circuit. "What the hell are you doing?" Weston's voice was quiet. "Sir, that is not standard equipment. That is not approved by Bureau of Ships." Weston stepped into the compartment. His jaw was tight. Unauthorized modification of military equipment is a serious crime. "Sir, I was trying to stop the signature, the sound that—" "To what? To sabotage your own boat?" Weston reached toward the transmitter circuit. "I'm placing you under report. Unauthorized modification. Article 92, War Crime Endangerment." Mackenzie's voice came out small. "It works, sir. The Germans won't hear us." Weston paused for just a moment. Then he yanked out the borrowed condenser, destroying weeks of careful work with a single violent motion. His eyes met Mackenzie's. There was something behind that anger, something old, something that looked like regret. "You want a medal for this, Mackenzie?" Weston said quietly. "You'll get a cell instead." He turned and walked out. Sunrise came cold and gray. Mackenzie spent the pre-dawn hours erasing all evidence, desoldering connections, running diagnostics, destroying the condenser. By dawn, there was nothing left to prove what he'd attempted, but Weston knew, and Weston was going to report it. At 0800 hours, Mackenzie reported to Captain Benson's quarters. Benson was reading Weston's report. The captain didn't look up. "Radioman McKenzie, you stand accused of unauthorized modification of critical military equipment. The engineering officer indicates you had the opportunity to damage this vessel's only means of long-distance communication. This is the kind of negligence that costs lives." Mackenzie said nothing. "Do you have anything to say?" "Sir, the modification was designed to mask our radio signature during transmitter power down. It works. I tested it." Benson's eyes came up from the report. "On my transmitter, without authorization, without an officer present." "Yes, sir." Benson stood and walked to the transmitter compartment. Mackenzie followed. The captain examined the equipment slowly, running through a complete diagnostic check. After 10 minutes, Benson activated the transmitter on a local test frequency, powered it down. Only static, clean, continuous. Benson's expression didn't change. He powered it back up, then down again. The same result. He turned to Mackenzie. "I see no evidence of any modification, Radioman." The words hung in the air between them. "The modification is gone, sir. I removed it. After Lieutenant Weston found out, I didn't want to—" "I understand." Benson moved closer. "That sound you described, the one the Germans are tracking us by, that is very real. The Navy has been looking for ways to mask it for 6 months. Very successful ways." He paused, looked directly at Mackenzie. "Sometimes the best solutions come from people who have nothing to lose, Radioman. Remember that." Then he was gone. At 14:47 hours that day, the Grayback received a radio contact report. A German U-boat on the surface, probably refueling, definitely dangerous. Captain Benson sounded the alarm. Combat stations. The Grayback began closing on the contact, but as the distance closed, the U-boat detected them. The submarine began to dive, and that meant the USS Grayback had to dive too. That meant powering down the transmitter. That meant broadcasting the kill signature to every German listening station in the Atlantic. Benson's voice came through the speakers. "All hands prepare to dive. Silent stations. We're going deep." McKenzie's hands moved automatically, securing the radio equipment. But his mind was somewhere else. His mind was on the condenser from USS Salmon, the one he'd destroyed, the one that had worked perfectly. He stared at the transmitter circuit, and he thought about Benson's words. Sometimes the best solutions come from people who have nothing to lose. He stared at the empty space where his modification had been. Then he looked more carefully at the particular arrangement of the existing condensers, at a configuration that suddenly seemed too deliberate, too precise, like someone with a lot more experience than a 21-year-old Radioman had re-engineered something very carefully. Radioman powered down the transmitter, beginning dive sequence. McKenzie reached for the power switch and initiated the shutdown sequence. The click-hiss-pop that should have killed them all didn't happen. Instead, there was white noise, clean, continuous, the sound of a submarine that was invisible to German hydrophones. The USS Grayback descended through 300 feet, then 400, then 500. The hull groaned with pressure. No explosions, no German torpedoes, just the safe, beautiful silence of a submarine that nobody could hear. And McKenzie understood with absolute certainty that the modification he had created, the one that wasn't supposed to exist anymore, was protecting them all right now. The solution had lived, not because of what McKenzie had done, but because of what Captain Benson had chosen to do in response. Sometimes the best solutions come from people who have nothing to lose. Sometimes the best protection comes from men with everything to lose, who choose to protect them anyway. December 10th, 1942, USS Grayback returned to Pearl Harbor after her first successful patrol. The boat tied up at the dock like a warhorse coming home. Salt-stained hull, bent antennas, a crew that was, against all odds, still alive. 47 men walked off that boat. 47. In a submarine force where the casualty rate was approaching 60%, Grayback was a ghost story told in reverse, not a missing boat, a boat that came home. McKenzie stood on the dock with his sea bag slung over his shoulder, watching the dock workers secure the mooring lines. His hands were still steady. His mind was still cataloging every dive, every powered-down transmission, every moment the white noise had protected them. Nobody knew what he'd done. That was the part that stuck with him. Nobody knew, and they never would. That night, McKenzie went to the submarine base bar in Honolulu. The place was chaos, sailors from a dozen boats, all of them talking, drinking, trying to forget what they'd seen. The smell of whiskey and sweat and salt water filled the room like fog. He was drinking his second beer when a radioman sat down next to him. Radioman Second Class Jack Henderson, 34 years old, career sailor, the kind of man who heard things through the networks, the submarine grapevine that ran through every base, every maintenance station, every bar where submariners gathered. "Grayback?" Henderson didn't wait for an answer. "Heard you guys had a clean patrol, no losses. That's rare these days." McKenzie nodded, took a drink. "The thing is," Henderson said carefully, "I've been hearing rumors from 3 different boats, different crews, all the same story." He paused. "Something about a modification to the transmitter, something that makes you invisible to hydrophones." McKenzie's glass stopped halfway to his lips. "Could be bullshit," Henderson continued. "Navy rumors. Half of what we hear is propaganda or wishful thinking. But this one keeps repeating. Same details, same result. German U-boat commanders suddenly can't find us during dives." McKenzie set down his glass very carefully. "I heard it from a torpedo officer on Trigger," Henderson said. "Lost a sonar operator last week. Kid was 19. They found him in the radio compartment during the post-battle damage assessment. Most of him anyway." Henderson took a long drink. This officer, he said the modification came from Grayback. Some radio man figured it out. Broke about 1,000 Navy regulations to do it. Your captain either protected him or did it himself. Either way, the modification works. German hydrophones can't lock onto the signature anymore. Henderson turned to face McKenzie directly. That you? McKenzie met his eyes, held them for 3 seconds, then looked away. No, he said. I'm just the night watch. Henderson smiled. It was a sad smile, the smile of a man who'd been young once and understood why lies were necessary. Well, Henderson said, if it was you, tell yourself something. This modification, it's spreading. Radio men are passing it to other radio men. Quiet, underground. Nobody official is approving it. Nobody's putting it in any report. But it's happening. I've got a plan to install it on trigger before our next patrol. He stood to leave. Tell whoever did it, don't be a hero. Just let it work. Let it save lives. That's all the credit they need. That's the only kind that matters. Henderson walked back into the noise of the bar. McKenzie never saw him again. January through March 1943, the modification spread like a virus, not through official channels, through the Radioman network, through whispered conversations in maintenance compartments, through notes passed between boats during refueling stops, through the kind of communication that left no paper trail. By February, 47 submarines had the modification. By March, the casualty rate had dropped by 73%. American submariners were coming home. The Germans noticed. Admiral Karl Donitz's reports to Berlin became increasingly frustrated. His hydrophone operators described American submarines as phantom boats, vessels that appeared on sonar but produced no electromagnetic signature when they dove. There was no explanation in the German technical manual for what they were hearing. One U-boat captain, Oberleutnant zur See Reinhard Hardigan, filed a report to the German Naval High Command, speculating that the Americans had developed some form of electromagnetic cloaking. His exact words, translated from German naval records: "The enemy submarines have become invisible to our ears. This is technological witchcraft." It was not witchcraft. It was one 21-year-old radioman's insomnia, but nobody knew. The Navy's Bureau of Ships began investigating where the unauthorized modifications were coming from. They found condensers on 17 submarines. They opened a formal investigation. A court-martial was being prepared. Someone was going to be charged with unauthorized modification of military equipment. Someone was going to prison. That's when Captain Robert Benson submitted a report to the Naval Court of Inquiry. The report stated simply that modifications had been discovered during USS Grayback's maintenance inspections, that they appeared to be engineered solutions to the radio signature problem, that they had proven effective, that Bureau of Ships should evaluate them for fleet-wide implementation. Benson made no mention of Thomas McKenzie. The court-martial investigation was quietly closed. No prosecution, no trials. Instead, the Navy's official story became, Bureau of Ships had developed the modification as part of their ongoing radio system improvements. By May 1943, every new submarine rolling out of the shipyards had the modification installed as standard equipment, official, approved, credited to Navy engineers, and Thomas McKenzie was erased. McKenzie served out the rest of the war without incident, promoted to Radioman First Class in 1943, 2 more patrols aboard Grayback. The boat never lost a man to German attack. 47 crew members, 51 in total across her patrols, all went home because of a modification that nobody officially knew McKenzie had created. When he left the Navy in October 1945, he received an honorable discharge and a medal for service to the submarine force. The citation mentioned exemplary conduct, nothing else. No innovation, no heroism. He returned to Boston and took a job as an electrician. He married a woman named Catherine in 1946. They had 2 children, Robert and Mary. He worked steadily for 43 years, installing electrical systems in office buildings and apartment complexes across Massachusetts. His wife never asked about the war. His children asked. He told them it was boring, that he'd spent most of it in a dark room listening to equipment hum. They accepted this. It was easier than the truth. He died on March 14, 1996. Cardiac arrest. Heart attack while working in the basement of an office building in Boston. He was 75 years old. There was a small funeral. His wife was already dead, past 2 years earlier. His children came. His grandchildren came. Nobody mentioned submarines. Nobody mentioned the war. He never knew that his modification had saved more than 200 lives. He never knew that the German Navy had given up trying to figure out how their hydrophones had been defeated. He never knew that the system he'd created was still being used in modified form on submarines around the world. He just lived his life and died thinking his war service was unremarkable. In 1998, 2 years after McKenzie's death, a military historian named Dr. Ellen Reeves was reviewing declassified documents at the Naval Records Center in Washington. She was researching the development of submarine radio systems during World War II. It was supposed to be a straightforward project, documenting how the Navy had solved the electromagnetic signature problem. Instead, she found a discrepancy. The official Navy history credited Bureau of Ships with developing the modification in early 1943, but the court-martial investigation files, newly declassified, told a different story. There were names in those files, investigators' notes, a reference to unauthorized modifications aboard USS Grayback, discovered February 1943, and one name, Radioman 3rd Class Thomas McKenzie. Reeves spent 2 years tracking down the truth. She found personnel records, service evaluations, a letter from Captain Benson to a friend, written in 1948, in which he briefly mentioned a young radioman who understood radio physics better than the engineers at Bureau of Ships. She found living relatives. It took her 3 months to locate Robert McKenzie, Thomas's son. He lived in Providence, Rhode Island. He worked as a high school mathematics teacher. She called him on a Tuesday afternoon in September 2000. When Reeves told Robert what his father had done, there was a long silence on the line. "My father never mentioned any of this," Robert finally said. His voice was careful, controlled, like someone trying not to break. "In 55 years, not once. He just came home and went to work." Reeves explained the statistics. The boats saved, the men alive, the German confusion. "He never told us," Robert repeated. "We never knew." After they hung up, Robert sat in his living room for a long time. He looked at the photographs on the mantel, his father at different ages, as a young man in uniform, as a working electrician, as an old man sitting in a garden looking at nothing in particular. His father had saved 200 lives and never told a soul. Act 5, the memorial. In 2019, USS Grayback was discovered on the ocean floor off Okinawa. She had been lost on her 4th patrol in February 1944. 79 men went down with her, all killed when a German U-boat got close enough to fire its torpedoes before the Grayback's modification could matter. The boat was found intact 600 meters down. Her hull was preserved by the cold and pressure of the deep water. Her name was still visible on the hull. The Navy dedicated a memorial to the submarine and her lost crew. 79 names were engraved on black granite. One of those names was Thomas McKenzie. The inscription simply read, "Radioman, USS Grayback, SS-208. It did not list him as the man who had saved more than 200 lives on other submarines, the man whose desperation and insomnia had made a difference in the Atlantic, the man who had broken regulations to save strangers he would never meet. just Radioman. Every November 23rd, the anniversary of the night McKenzie stayed awake and wired a condenser into a transmitter, Robert McKenzie drives to a memorial park in Boston. It's on a hill overlooking the harbor. There's a bench there, no plaque, no marker, just an ordinary bench where Robert brings his daughter, Sarah. Sarah is now 34 years old, a physics professor at MIT. She specializes in electromagnetic systems and radio frequency technology. Her research, in ways she doesn't fully understand, traces its lineage back to her grandfather's discovery. Why do we come here? Sarah asks every year, and every year she asks as if she doesn't know the answer. And Robert tells her the story about a 21-year-old radio man who couldn't sleep, about insomnia and desperation, about breaking rules to save lives, about how the system protected itself by erasing the name. But people know now, Sarah says. Historians know. Some people, Robert agrees. Military historians, naval engineers, radio specialists, but not the public, not the people whose lives depend every day on radio technology his work helped pioneer. Does that bother you? Sarah asks. Robert looks out at the harbor, the same water where his father learned radio as a boy, the same water where his father's solutions still save lives. No, Robert says. It bothered him, or it would have if he'd known. But he didn't know. He never knew that his modification worked. He never knew that he saved anyone. He just came home and installed electrical systems in buildings. For 43 years, he lived a quiet life. That seems unfair, Sarah says. It is, Robert agrees. But the people who were saved, they lived. That was his reward. That was always his reward. Everything else is just noise. They sit in silence for a while. My research, Sarah says slowly, it might help with the next generation of submarine technology, stealth systems, detection avoidance. I know, Robert says. I didn't know where that interest came from, why I was drawn to it. Maybe you inherited it, Robert suggests. Not just his brain, but his instinct, his understanding that sometimes you solve problems because people need you to solve them, not for credit, just because it matters. Sarah nods. She doesn't smile. It's not a moment for smiling. I wish I could have thanked him, she says finally. You are thanking him, Robert says. Every time you solve a problem, every time you use that brain he gave you, through me, from his generation, you're thanking him. He's alive in this, in you. Epilogue: The Invisible Lineage. In 2024, a researcher reviewing submarine force records for a documentary on World War II technology discovered the complete story of Thomas McKenzie. The story was published in a military journal. It received modest attention. Military historians noted it. Submarine communities discussed it online. A brief mention in a Navy publication about the development of radio countermeasures. But the general public never heard about Thomas McKenzie. There was no statue, no holiday, no official Navy recognition beyond a mention in declassified documents. And that was fine, because on submarines around the world, radio men know the story. They know that modifications to their transmitter systems, the ones that keep them invisible to enemy sonar, trace their lineage back to one night in November 1942, when a kid couldn't sleep. They don't hold ceremonies for him. They don't need to. He's alive every single day they come home safe. That's credit enough. That was always enough. That's all he ever wanted, not the fame, not the recognition, just the knowledge that his solution was working, that people were coming home. And somewhere on the ocean floor, 79 meters below the surface, the USS Grayback sits in the darkness, her crew long dead, her hull intact, her name still visible on the stern. And inside her, in the place where the radio compartment would have been, the ghost of a modification lives on, Not the physical condenser anymore, but the idea, the solution. The proof that sometimes the most powerful change comes from the most ordinary people in the most desperate moments. Thomas McKenzie never became a name in history. He became something better. He became the reason people lived.